He heard it again last night. A soft cry, muffled, broken. He thought it was just noise. A married couple next door. Another Tokyo night. But then, he met her eyes in the hallway, and everything he thought he knew collapsed. She wasn't just someone's wife. She was forgotten, beautiful, lonely, and she saw him. He knew it was wrong, but have you ever needed someone so badly you ignored everything else? This isn't just about love. It's about what we do when love disappears. Some nights are so loud, you forget who you are. Michael had always been a quiet soul. He didn't crave chaos, didn't chase noise, and definitely didn't seek out conflict. But Tokyo wasn't the kind of place that let you rest easy. The neon lights blinked late into the night. The streets murmured with footsteps and distant laughter. And inside his tiny one-room apartment, Michael sat under the cold glare of a desk lamp, buried in books and notes, desperately preparing for a job interview that felt like the last chance to save himself. He hadn't seen his family in years. Friends had drifted away. It was just him now, surviving on instant noodles and ambition. Then it started. The noises. It began with muffled sounds at first, scraping furniture, soft cries, a voice feminine, strained, but somehow graceful. At midnight, it grew louder, thuds, unintelligible conversations, and something else, something more intimate. He didn't want to imagine, he didn't want to assume, but each night, as he sat trying to focus, he could hear it. The laughter, the arguments, the small, aching silences in between. The new neighbors had just moved in, a married couple. He hadn't seen them properly, just brief glances in the hallway. But the woman he remembered her eyes, the kind that held sorrow behind perfectly practiced smiles. Her name was Kathryn. She was elegant, always dressed like she belonged to another time. The way she carried herself, graceful, slow, deliberate, made her stand out even in the crowded chaos of the apartment block. Michael never meant to listen. He tried earplugs, music, even sleeping at different hours. But the walls were thin and the voices bled through. At first, he thought it was passion. But over time, the tone shifted. Less desire, more duty. Less love, more fatigue. He overheard enough to understand. Her husband was ill. Not seriously, but enough that she had become his caretaker. The kind of role that drains not only your energy, but your joy. Michael recognized that look in her eyes the first time they stood together, waiting for the elevator, half smile, half regret. He had worn that same expression in the mirror countless mornings. Alone, exhausted, surviving. The nights dragged on. The pressure of the job interview weighed heavier on his shoulders. Sleep deprived and irritable, he snapped one evening banging on the wall, yelling out in frustration. The noise stopped for a while, then it returned, stronger, sharper, like the walls were mocking him. He couldn't take it anymore. He walked over to their door one night and knocked, his heart pounding. When her husband answered, Michael tried to keep his voice calm, polite, but the man just sneered, laughed. "It's called marriage, kid. You'll get it when you're older." Michael stood frozen, fists clenched. Behind the man, he saw her Kathryn, and for the first time, their eyes truly met. A flicker of shame crossed hers. She looked as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. just silence. That night, Michael couldn't sleep, not because of the noise, but because of the way she looked at him, like she was trapped. Like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one who felt unbearably alone. Have you ever been like them? Waiting for a life that no longer feels like yours? If so, keep listening. Michael tried to push the moment from his mind, but something about her eyes wouldn't leave him. Not the elegance, not the beauty, but the sadness. It sat behind her smile like an old wound no one had asked about in years. Still, he had an interview to prepare for. Every night, he lit the same lamp, drank the same bitter instant coffee, stared at the same stack of notes, and told himself to focus. He repeated affirmations under his breath. You're almost there, just a little longer. But the walls kept bleeding noise. Not always arguments, sometimes just the low hum of a TV, the scraping of a chair, the occasional coughing fit from the husband. Michael's patience wore thin. It wasn't just the noise. It was the way it pulled at something deep inside him. A constant reminder of what he didn't have. A reminder that even love, even companionship, could rot in silence. So he tried again. One more knock. This time, he wasn't angry, just tired. Kathryn's husband opened the door, already scowling. Again? Seriously? The man scoffed. You want us to whisper all night? What are you, a monk? Michael's voice trembled, but he held his ground. I'm just asking for a little consideration. I have something important coming up. The man smirked, eyes cold. And I have a wife who barely speaks unless I'm dying. We all have our problems. Before Michael could respond, the door slammed. It was humiliating. But then, something unexpected happened. The next morning, as Michael was locking his door to head to a nearby cafe, he heard soft footsteps. Turning around, he saw Kathryn standing in the hallway holding a small container. For you, she said quietly, offering him a bento box. You looked tired yesterday. He didn't know what to say. Thank you, he whispered, accepting it with both hands. She gave a slight bow and turned to leave, but paused. I'm sorry about the noise. And about him, she said, barely above a whisper. He wasn't always like this. Michael wanted to ask what happened, why she looked so tired, why she seemed so far away, even when she was standing just inches in front of him. But he said nothing. She smiled sadly. I hope your interview goes well. Then she disappeared behind her door. That night, Michael didn't hear anything. No coughing, no arguments, no scraping furniture, just silence. But instead of relief, he felt something else. Loneliness. He didn't want to admit it, but he had gotten used to the sounds. Not because they were comforting, but because they reminded him that life was happening next door. That even in misery, someone was there. Someone like her. And so, when the next day came and the hallway remained quiet, he stood outside his door a little longer than usual, hoping to see her again. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew who. That night, the silence was broken, but not by noise, by her presence. Michael had just returned from a walk meant to clear his head, but his thoughts were still heavy. As he approached his door, he nearly dropped his keys when he saw her standing there, Kathryn, leaning gently against the wall, hands clasped, dressed in a soft beige sweater that made her look even more fragile under the dim hallway light. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his. "I thought maybe you'd join me for dinner?" she asked, voice tender, uncertain. "My husband's away tonight. Business trip." There was a long pause, the kind that stretches into something neither of you knows how to name. "Okay," Michael said softly. Inside, her apartment was modest but elegant. A single orchid sat in a glass vase on the table. The lighting was warm, so unlike his room, cold, functional, lifeless. She moved around the kitchen with practiced grace, offering him a glass of water, then placing a simple home-cooked meal in front of him. They sat down, awkward at first, but the tension melted as they talked about books, music, where they came from, and how they both ended up so quietly lost in a city full of people. She smiled more than he had ever seen her do in the hallway, and he laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Then it happened. She reached across the table to pour him some more tea, and her hand knocked over his glass. Water splashed across his shirt and into his lap. They both froze, because when her fingers touched his shirt, her eyes met his, and neither of them moved. Everything slowed. The city noise outside vanished. There were no walls, no husband, no consequences. Just her and him. And now, in this fragile moment, she allowed herself to be held, not because it was right, but because it was real. And for the first time in a long time, she felt alive. Days passed, then weeks. Their world shifted softly, secretly, but undeniably. Michael no longer lived between gray walls and job applications. He woke up looking forward to the soft knock at the door, to the quiet moments shared on the rooftop at dusk, to the warmth of her smile across the hallway. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was feeling. Kathryn never said much about her husband. She didn't need to. The silence between her words carried all the weight. Michael understood. She had been loyal, patient, endlessly giving, but love, when left unfed, begins to die slowly, without sound. And now, what they shared, this quiet, forbidden tenderness, felt more honest than any vow ever spoken. He would stand by the wall some nights, listening, not because of the noise anymore, but because he wanted to hear her. A laugh, a sigh, anything to know she was still on the other side. But one night, he heard crying. It wasn't loud, just soft, stifled sobs, a sound so raw it made his heart twist. The next morning, he left early for an errand. As he turned the corner in the hallway, he came face to face with a man he hadn't seen in weeks. Kathryn's husband. Sharp suit. Same bitter eyes. Same mocking tone. "Still around?" the man sneered. "Guess some strays don't know when they're not wanted." Michael didn't respond, but the unease stayed with him all day. Something was wrong. When he returned that evening, the hallway lights flickered as he reached his door. And there she was, Kathryn, waiting outside. Her eyes red, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. He didn't say a word, just unlocked his door and stepped aside. She followed him in. For a long moment, they just stood there, the quiet wrapped around them like a blanket. Then finally, she spoke. "He left," she whispered. "He packed his things and left." Michael's breath caught. "Why?" Kathryn sat down on the edge of his bed, her voice trembling. "Because I told him I knew. About the other woman. About all of it. I think he was relieved." She looked up at Michael, tears glistening, but her expression wasn't broken. It was peaceful. "We were done long before you ever knocked on our door," she said. "We just didn't want to admit it." He sat beside her, gently taking her hand. "I don't want to be someone's escape," he said quietly. "You're not," she replied. "You're the first place I've ever felt safe." There were no more secrets between them, no more walls. Just the simple, quiet truth of two people who had been lonely for far too long. Michael didn't get that job in the end, but he didn't feel lost anymore. Now, he waited in the hallway, not for silence, but for her. And when she appeared, when she smiled, when their hands brushed and lingered just a little longer than before, he knew. Sometimes, the heart doesn't need the perfect moment. It just needs to be seen. Have you ever felt invisible until someone finally saw you? Because that's how love often begins, not with lightning, but with a whisper through the wall.